So I was reading some story about, I think it was Google, that's saying that they're going to have multiple nuclear reactors to power their database.
That's what you got to do now, because what's going on is North America is kind of running out of on-grid baseload power to actually supply these data centers. You're getting data center building moratoriums in areas like Virginia, which is traditionally been like the data center cluster for Amazon, for example, and for a lot of these other companies. And so when you build a data center, you need a bunch of resources, sited close to that data center. You need water for cooling and a source of electricity. And it turns out that, wind and solar don't really quite cut it for these big data centers that train big models, because the data center, the training consumes power like this all the time, but the sun isn't always shining, the wind isn't always blowing. And so you got to build nuclear reactors, which give you high capacity factor baseload. And Amazon literally bought, a data center with a nuclear plant right next to it, because that's what you got to do.
Jesus. How long does it take to build a nuclear reactor? Because this is the race, right? The race is, you're talking about 2020, people realizing this. Then you have to have the power to supply it. But how many years does it take to get an active nuclear reactor up and running?
It's an answer that depends. The Chinese are faster than us at building nuclear reactors, for example.
And that's part of the geopolitics of this too, right? When you look at U.S. versus China, what is bottlenecking each country, right? So the U.S. is bottlenecked increasingly by power, baseload power. China, because we've got export control measures in place, in part as a response to the scaling phenomenon that,
and as a result of the investigation we did.
That's right. Yeah. Actually,
in part.
But China is bottlenecked by their access to the actual processors. They've got all the power they can eat because they've got much more infrastructure investment, but the chip side is weaker. So there's just sort of balancing act between the two sides. And it's not clear yet which one positions you strategically for dominance in the long term.
But we are also building better, more small modular reactors, essentially small nuclear power plants that can be mass produced. Those are starting to come online relatively early, but the technology and designs are pretty mature. So that's probably the next beat for our power grid for data centers, I would imagine. Microsoft is doing this.
So in 2020, you have this revelation. You recognize where this is going. You see how it charts, and you say, this is going to be a real problem. Does anybody listen to you? This is where the problem comes, right?
Yeah, like we said, right? You can draw a straight line. You can have people nodding along, but there's a couple of hiccups along the way. One, is that straight line really going to happen? All you're doing is drawing lines on charts, right? I don't really believe that that's going to happen, and that's one thing. The next thing is just imagining, is this what's going to come to pass as a result of that? And then the third thing is, well, yeah, that sounds important, but not my problem. That sounds like an important problem for somebody else. And so we did do a bit of a traveling.
It was like the world's saddest traveling roadshow. It was literally as dumb as this sounds. So we go and, oh my God, I mean, it's almost embarrassing to think back on. But so 2020 happens, yes, within months. First of all, we're we got to figure out how to hand off our company. So we handed it off to two of our earliest employees. They did an amazing job. Company exited. That's great. But that was only because they're so good at what they do. We then went, what the hell? How can you steer this situation? We just thought we got to wake up the U.S. government. As stupid and naive as that sounds, that was the big picture goal. So we start to line up as many briefings as we possibly can across the U.S. interagency, all the departments, all the agencies that we can find, climbing our way up. We got an awful lot, like Ed said, of that sounds like a wicked important problem for somebody else to solve.
Yeah, like defense, homeland security, and then the State Department.
Yeah, so we end up exactly in this meeting with there's about a dozen folks from the State Department. And one of them, and I hope at some point, history recognizes what she did and her team did, because it was the first time that somebody actually stood up and said, first of all, yes, sounds like a serious issue. I see the argument, makes sense. 2, I own this. And 3, I'm going to put my own career capital behind this.
And that was at the end of 2021. So imagine that. That's a year before ChatGPT. Nobody was tracking this issue. You had to have the imagination to draw through that line, understand what it meant, and then believe yeah, I'm going to risk some career capital on this in a risk-averse government.
And this is the only reason that we even were able to publicly talk about the investigation in the first place, because by the time this whole assessment was commissioned, it was just before ChatGPT came out. The Eye of Sauron was not yet on this. And so there was a view that, like, yeah, sure, you can publish the results of this kind of, not nothing burger investigation, but, you could, sure, go ahead. And it just became this insane story. We had like the UK AI Safety Summit, we had the White House executive order, all this stuff, which became entangled with the work we were doing, which we simply could not have. Especially some of the reports we were collecting from the labs, the whistleblower reports, that could not have been made public if it wasn't for the foresight of this team really pushing for as well the American population to hear about it.
Now, I could see how if you were one of the people that's on this expansion-minded mindset, like all you're thinking about is like getting this up and running, you guys are a pain in the ass, right?
So
you guys, you're obviously you're doing something really ridiculous. You're stopping your company. You could make more money staying there and continuing the process, but you recognize that there's like an existential threat involved in making this stuff go online. Like when this stuff is live, you can't undo it.
Oh yeah, I mean, like no matter how much money you're making, the dumbest thing to do is to stand by as something that completely transcends money is being developed, and it's just going to screw you over if things go badly, right?
My point is like, are there people that push back against this, and what is their argument?
Yeah. So actually, and I'll let you follow up on the first story of the pushback. I think it's kind of it's been in the news a little bit lately now, getting more and more public. But when we started this, and like no one was talking about it, the one group that was actually pushing sort of stuff in this space was a big funder in the area of like effective altruism. I think you may have heard of them. This is kind of a Silicon Valley group of people who have a certain mindset about how you pick tough problems to work on, valuable problems to work on. They've had all kinds of issues. Sam Bankman-Fried was one of them, and all that, quite famously. So we're not effective altruists, but because these are the folks who are working in the space, we decided, well, we'll talk to them. And the first thing they told us was, don't talk to the government about this. Their position was, if you bring this to the attention of the government, they will go, oh shit, powerful AI systems, and they're not going to hear about the dangers, so they're going to somehow go out and build the powerful systems without caring about the risk side. Which, when you're like in that startup mindset, you want to fail cheap. Like you don't want to just like make assumptions about the world and be like, okay, let's not touch it. So our instinct was, okay, let's just test this a little bit and like talk to a couple people, see how they respond, tweak the message, like kind of keep climbing that ladder.